On April 5th, 1936, at approximately 5 minutes to 9 in the evening, Tupelo, Mississippi. Sunday was drawing to a close. Families were returning from church, dinner tables were being cleared, children were preparing for bed, and rain was already striking the rooftops with growing force. The stores downtown were closed, a few automobiles hurried home along the wet streets, and the city seemed almost peaceful. In the poor community of East Tupelo, inside a small two-room house, lived the only surviving son of Vernon and Gladys Presley. Elvis was not yet a year and a half old. He could not remember that night. He could not understand why the adults were listening so closely to the thunder, or why the light beyond the window seemed strange. No one in the city knew that within minutes, thousands of boards, bricks, and fragments of buildings would become airborne weapons. No one knew how many homes would vanish completely. And no one could have imagined that among those spared by the storm would be a child whose voice would one day be heard across the world. The danger had begun forming long before the first ominous roar reached Tupelo. Warm, moisture-laden air was flowing northward from the Gulf, while a powerful low-pressure system moved across the region. Beyond the city, thunderstorms were already rising one after another, drawing increasing amounts of energy from the warm air near the ground. Today, meteorologists would see rotation on radar, calculate the storm's path, and send warnings directly to people's phones. But in 1936, none of that existed. The first successful tornado forecast in the United States would not be made for another 12 years, and public weather bulletins often avoided using the word tornado altogether. Forecasters had paper maps, barometer readings, and scattered reports transmitted by telegraph. Meanwhile, destructive tornadoes were already developing elsewhere in the region. The atmosphere was becoming violently unstable, but to the people of Tupelo, the approaching storm still appeared to be nothing more than a severe spring thunderstorm. That lack of knowledge was precisely what made the coming night so deadly. By evening, the rain had intensified. Lightning briefly illuminated the low clouds, but between the crashes of thunder, residents began to hear another sound. It was continuous and heavy, like a long freight train approaching the city without slowing down. Gusts of wind began throwing branches onto power lines and rooftops, but through the solid curtain of rain, the true danger was almost impossible to see. At approximately 5 minutes to 9, a massive funnel descended west of Tupelo and began moving from the southwest toward the northeast. Later studies of the destruction would lead experts to classify it as a tornado of the highest category on the Fujita scale. But at that moment, no such category existed. There was only wind powerful enough to tear away roofs, uproot trees, and lift entire walls into the air within seconds. People rushed into hallways, crawled beneath beds, or pressed themselves into the corners of their homes. Those who heard the tornado too late had no time to do anything. The funnel entered the residential districts, and the familiar city began to disappear. Not gradually, but house by house, street by street, in total darkness. First came the cracking of timber, then the collapse of brick, the shattering of glass, and the metallic scream of roofs being ripped from buildings. The air filled with splintered wood, nails, sheets of metal, and fragments of furniture. Inside their homes, people felt the walls bending, doors tearing from their hinges, and the pressure forcing the air out of the rooms. Some buildings were not merely damaged. They were lifted from their foundations, crushed into fragments, and scattered across fields beyond the city. The walls of the old school on Church Street collapsed directly onto the small desks, burying much of the classrooms beneath debris. At the high school, a wall between the auditorium and the gymnasium fell, crushing rows of seats. Only minutes earlier, hundreds of people had been gathered there for a church service. Had the tornado arrived slightly sooner, the death toll might have been far higher. But this accidental escape did not mean the city had avoided the worst. The tornado passed near the commercial center and instead struck residential neighborhoods, where families sheltered inside homes that had never been built to withstand such force. The most horrifying turn came in the Gum Pond district. This low-lying marshy area was home primarily to poor and working-class African-American families. The funnel swept away wooden houses and threw their wreckage, along with the people inside them, into the dark water. In the darkness, it was impossible to distinguish the edge of the pond from the flooded streets, and human cries disappeared beneath the roar of the rain and wind. After the storm, many victims were recovered from the pond. Some were never found, For this reason, the official death toll is still considered incomplete. Then the city's water tower collapsed. Fires broke out, but there was almost no water available to fight them. Electrical lines lay across the ground, telephone connections were severed, and the streets were blocked by fallen trees and the remains of buildings. Heavy rain continued, raising the water in some places almost to knee level. It helped contain the flames, but it also transformed the rescue of the injured into a desperate struggle through mud, darkness, and debris. The city had lost more than its homes. It had lost the ability to understand quickly what had happened and who could still be saved. When the wind finally moved away, the silence was more terrifying than the roar. Cries came from beneath the wreckage. Neighbors pulled apart collapsed walls with their bare hands, used broken doors as stretchers, and carried the injured through the darkness by the light of automobile headlights and kerosene lamps. People called out the names of relatives, but often heard only the rain, the shifting of loose boards, and the moans of those who were still alive. A state geologist later recorded the story of J.J. Huffman. Almost nothing remained of his house except part of the floor, while the walls, as he described it, seemed to have been lifted over him and his sister. One of their relatives was thrown by the wind across the distance of several houses. He died only hours later. Similar stories unfolded throughout Tupelo. Hospitals became overwhelmed, and victims were transported to other cities and even to neighboring states. Meanwhile, in East Tupelo, the Presley family home remained standing. We do not know exactly what happened inside it or where the infant Elvis was during every moment of the storm. But one fact is certain. He, his mother, and his father survived a night in which entire families disappeared within seconds. Officially, the tornado killed 216 people and injured approximately 700. A state geologist counted 233 burials, while some researchers believe the true death toll may have been close to 250 because African American victims and those who died later from their injuries were not always included in official records. At least 200 homes were destroyed or damaged, dozens of city blocks were devastated, and the losses exceeded $3 million in the value of that time. The path of destruction stretched for approximately 15 miles, and in some places the tornado approached 3,000 feet in width. Even a heavy monument commemorating the Battle of Tupelo was knocked down, while the pulverized remains of houses were deposited in long rows across fields beyond the city limits. The Tupelo tornado became one of the deadliest tornadoes in the history of the United States, yet the disaster was not over. The following morning, the same weather system produced another tornado in Gainesville, Georgia, killing more than 200 additional people. For the American South, these were hours in which the weather itself seemed to have become a merciless machine. It is tempting to say that the tornado changed Elvis Presley's life forever, but that claim is more dramatic than the evidence allows. He was too young to retain a conscious memory of the disaster, and there is no reliable proof that the storm directly shaped his music or his personality. The truth is more modest, but also more powerful. The tornado changed Tupelo. It changed its streets, its families, its memories, and its understanding of danger. It did not create Elvis. It simply failed to destroy him. Years later, the boy from the surviving house would absorb the gospel music of church gatherings, the country songs of radio stations, and the rhythm and blues of the American South. He would eventually become the man the world called the king of rock and roll. But before the concerts, the records, and the millions of listeners, there was a single dark Sunday night. A tornado passed through his hometown, took hundreds of lives, and left behind an almost impossible question. How many future stories disappear in disasters, along with people whose names the world never had the chance to learn?